Pete and I set out along the side of the 19 Creek in search of a graveyard lost to nature and neglect. It's known as the 19th Mile Creek Cemetery, but originally it was called the New Salem Baptist Burial Ground. We had a general idea of its location, but with no roads or paths actually going to it, we were just making our way through the thorns, brush, and burrs following the creek.
Now, normally, you'd expect a small cemetery like this to be on the grounds of a church, and in this case, probably the Baptist church. And we're not sure why, but the Baptist church for this cemetery is across and down the road. It's about 700 meters down, which isn't a crazy long distance or anything, but a road, some farmland, and it being down a hill by the river seems to have made it enough of a chore that over time it was ignored and abandoned. Eventually, after a bit of bushwhacking, we started to see some stones peeking through the brush, and if we weren't already carefully looking out for poison ivy and thorns, we'd need to be extra careful placing each step so we didn't walk on fallen gravestones.
I did some digging to see if I could find out any information on the people that were buried here.
We're talking about like not literal digging, right? We're talking about like internet sleuthing kind of digging.
Correct. No graves were harmed in the making of this video.
That's a relief.
So I learned of Garret Oakes, who actually has a book published about him. Well, sort of about, sort of by. It's a collection of articles that he wrote and submitted to the local papers in the 1870s. It comes with a brief biography and some context for each article put together by the researchers. I unfortunately did this research after visiting, so I don't have a very good shot of his gravestone, but it's the pink granite one. It actually kind of sticks out from the rest for looking much more modern.
Now, Garret was one of the first pioneers in the area, and he was a bit of a Renaissance man. You know, being a pioneer comes with a lot of tasks and responsibilities. You weren't able to just slap up a house and just start living. He needed to be able to do things like to make roads, to clear the land, and to farm for food. And if you needed any kind of item, you'd most likely have to make it yourself. And fortunately, Mr. Oakes seemed to have had a bit of a knack for creating and building things.
Yep. He was a cooper, who is someone who builds the barrels for a distillery. He was a coffin maker.
I wonder if, do you imagine that anybody in this graveyard might be buried in one of his coffins?
I mean, most likely. He built spinning wheels, which are those big foot-powered wheels used for turning fiber into yarn. He also apparently built a perpetual motion machine, which he only ever showed to a couple people, one of which went on to describe it to the St. Thomas Journal in 1878.
Now, building various tools, containers, and contraptions weren't the only notable things about Garret Oakes. He also served in the War of 1812. He was briefly a teacher, even though he himself never finished a single year of school. He was a justice of the peace. He had 11 children, which sounds like a lot now, but it was more common back in those days. He was an investor in a local salt operation, too. You see, in a nearby creek
Called Salt Creek.
Very creative name there. There was salt found, but it ended up not being enough salt to form a mining operation. Lastly, he was also an accomplished sailor, a musician, and a skilled ventriloquist.
Very creepy. If you get the chance, read through some of his published articles. We'll link to the book in the description. They really paint a picture of how challenging life was back then and the type of character that Garret Oakes was. Being that Oakes did have his stories published and later collected into this book, I was able to find some pretty cool information about him. But everyone buried here has a story. Unfortunately, most, like this graveyard, are being lost to time.